Tune Review print speaking to the blind, celebrating 40 years of audio newspaper production. Welcome to this week's edition of the National Podcast, recorded at the Bishopbriggs Media Centre by our amazing volunteers. You can get in touch with us via Facebook, Twitter or Instagram using @TuneReview, that is @ CUEANDREVIEW. You can also contact us directly by emailing information@tunereview.com, that is INFORMATION@CUEANDREVIEW.com, or by calling 0141 772 3976. That's 0141 772 3976.
This is from The National on Friday the 24th of February 2023, from the Politics section. Duncan Scott calls on UK government to step in amid pool closures. This article is written by Jane MacLeod. Olympic gold medalist Duncan Scott has called on the UK government to help save the nation's community swimming pools amid fears that half face closure or cuts. Scotland's most decorated Olympic swimmer spoke out as leisure leaders warned a tide of shutdowns are on the cards unless ministers reverse a decision that will see already crippling energy price pressures reach an all-time high. Without the sector being classed as vulnerable, they have warned that as many as half of Britain's pools face closure or service cuts, threatening thousands of jobs across the UK. Posting on Twitter, Scott, who won a gold and 3 silvers at the Tokyo Olympics, said, "It's crazy for community swimming pools to be left off the discount scheme. Some leisure centres have seen their electricity bills triple. I'm so frustrated and upset by this. Unless more is done by the government, we are going to lose community hubs. So much goes on. I take great pride in being a Learn to Swim ambassador in Scotland. But how many more lessons are children going to be able to have if the number of pools is reduced?" Their plight is being highlighted as part of Big Swim Day, with the public being urged to swim and demand support for the sector using the hashtag #SaveOurPools and writing to MPs. The event is being organised by Community Leisure UK, CLUK, which represents 880 pools across the UK and employs 17,000 people. Scottish Commonwealth and European medalist Katie Shanahan spoke out in support of the event. She said, "Swimming pools are the centre of communities, bringing people of all ages and backgrounds together. It is such a great way to socialise while exercising and staying fit, and Big Swim Day is the perfect opportunity to get down to your local pool." CLUK wrote to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt, calling on him to designate leisure and cultural charity trusts as a vulnerable sector as part of the UK government's energy bill relief scheme, which was unsuccessful. Leisure leaders are calling for a reversal on this decision, saying pools are particularly vulnerable because of their high energy bills to heat water and the ambient environment. CLUK's Scottish chair, Robert Strang, said, "Without continued government support, our members tell us that up to half of their pools could close or face service cuts. They simply will not be able to afford to run them fully, if at all. That could mean alarming numbers of communities being robbed of a pool, potentially putting jobs in jeopardy. Allowing that to happen would be a national disgrace. Given that our members provide community services at affordable prices, it's the most vulnerable, those already hit hardest by the cost of living crisis and the ongoing impact of COVID-19, who will suffer the greatest, at a time when they need support with their health and well-being most." CLUK members provide community services at affordable prices. It says pool closures would not only block a reroute to better public health, but cause an irreparable blow to elite sporting development, losing medal winners of the future. British swimming legend Duncan Goodhue, a gold medalist at the 1980 Moscow Olympics, is supporting the call for government action. He said, This is make or break time for an alarming number of swimming pools across the UK. It's madness that the government doesn't seem able to see the danger they are in. Without pools and leisure centres being classed as vulnerable, the astronomical energy price hikes their operators face will sadly be the final fatal blow for many. Heating an average 25-metre 6-lane swimming pool uses about 1 million kilowatts of power per year. That compares to the average 2,900 kilowatts of electricity and 12,000 kilowatt of gas that energy regulator Ofgem says is used by the average British household annually. The UK government's energy bill relief scheme provides relief for non-domestic users across Great Britain and Northern Ireland by reducing gas and electricity unit prices. The sector was supported over the first 6 months of the scheme, but was not on the list announced for inclusion beyond April the 1st. That article was written by Jane MacLeod. This is from The National on Friday the 24th of February 2023, from the Politics section. MSPs unite to condemn Russian invasion of Ukraine on first anniversary. This article is written by Abby Garton-Crosby. MSPs were united as they marked a year since the outbreak of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine. The Scottish Parliament held a debate on Thursday to mark Russia's invasion on February the 24th, 2022. The government motion, which was supported by all parties, condemned in the strongest possible terms the illegal Russian war against Ukraine. Tens of thousands of people have died as a result of the conflict, and around 17 million people are currently displaced, either within Ukraine or as refugees across Europe. A year on, the war is raging unabated, with further offensives expected over the coming months. Neil Gray, the Scottish Government Minister for Ukrainian Refugees, announced an additional £1 million in humanitarian aid for Ukraine. He said, "It's now almost a year since Russian troops swarmed across Ukraine's borders in what was a brutal, unprovoked invasion against a peaceful neighbour. Today's debate gives us the opportunity to stand together, united, as we pause and reflect on the impact the past year has had on the people of Ukraine, including the brave soldiers who continue to fight daily for their country, their people, their culture and heritage." Gray said those in the Russian government and military must be held responsible for atrocities they have committed. Tory MSP Donald Cameron said Ukrainians staying in Scotland are not refugees, adding, "We're simply a staging post before they go home. The slings and arrows of domestic politics, the cut and thrust of everyday debate in this chamber, none of that matters today. The Scottish Parliament, like parliaments around the world, send a message of hope to Ukraine." Labour's Sarah Boyack noticed that it is rare for all parties at Holyrood to support a government motion without any amendments. She said, "Ukrainians suffered a cruel and unjustifiable attack, and the whole world witnessed it." However, she pressed the Scottish Government to do more to help Ukrainians in Scotland, saying, "There's a bit more that we could be doing." Andriy Kuzly, Ukraine's head of consulate in Edinburgh, attended the debate in the public gallery and was applauded by MSPs. MSPs unanimously agreed to a Scottish Government motion condemning the Russian invasion of Ukraine. That article was written by Abby Garton-Crosby.
From The National, Monday the 27th of February 2023, from the comment section. Economic policy recalibration is a true test in SNP leadership race, by George Caravan. I don't have a vote in the SNP leadership contest. I tore up my party card a while back after a quarter of a century's membership. I was disillusioned by the lack of internal democracy, the disdain of the leadership for the grassroots independence movement, the lack of a coherent strategy to gain majority support for nationhood, and my preoccupation as a professional economist, the abject failure of the SNP government's economic policy. Where are all those promised North Sea renewables jobs? So I feel diffident from outside about expressing any preference regarding the next SNP leader. However, I know that the three contenders are starting to realise the party and government will have to refocus on matters economic if we are to have a hope in Hades of 1. Retaining existing support for independence, and 2. Pushing sympathy for creating a new Scottish state towards the 60% mark that will guarantee success and national unity. It's the economy, stupid. This need to recalibrate economic policy is heavily reinforced by the so-called cost of living crisis. This is code for a dramatic fall in living standards. The OBR, the nearest thing we have to an objective economic forecaster, is predicting that UK households' incomes will fall by 7% over the next period. For many households, the effect will be much worse. The OBR thinks household incomes will still be lower than pre-pandemic levels even in 2028. In other words, we will not only be poorer absolutely, but poorer for a long time. Worse, if that's possible, this economic implosion is particularly bad in the UK. Compared to the pre-pandemic level, UK GDP at the end of 2022 was down 0.8%. This compares with the Eurozone countries where GDP was 2.4% higher than pre-pandemic times, and the US where GDP was actually 5.1%. These numbers are from the House of Commons Library. We can debate the causes of this inferior economic performance, Brexit, and incompetent Tory government, but the reality is that Scotland is trapped on a sinking UK ship. Harsh times lead people to either slump into the daily grind of survival or to seek radical solutions. If the SNP and the national movement do not provide a vision of economic recovery, the Scottish electorate will become disillusioned with the political status quo. That could mean a dramatic fall in SNP electoral support after a long 16 years in power. It might mean a revival of support for Labour, though Keir Starmer's inability to offer any economic solutions to the crisis suggests otherwise. Most likely we will see a rise in voter apathy, or an increased threat from the ultra-right. The ludicrous aspect of this political dilemma is that Scotland has long possessed all the ingredients to establish a strong, fair economy, bounteous natural resources, globally renowned universities, significant capital, and a talented creative workforce. Our descent into penury is self-inflicted. An already independent and richer Scotland would 1. Meet the present international economic crisis from a stronger base, and 2. Possess the levers of power to respond to that crisis in a more timely way. Instead, we are chained to Tory Britain in a new era of Sunak or Starmer austerity. The case for independence has always rested on the economic. The modern national movement, including the demand for devolution, rose on the ashes of the forced decline of our manufacturing base in the 1970s and the theft of our oil riches by Thatcher and the foreign energy monopolies. Alex Salmond revived the national movement in the 1990s by preaching the successful example of Ireland's Celtic Tiger. Though this was a risky strategy as it implied hitching Scotland's economic fortunes to the neoliberal globalist agenda. The SNP's rise to Holyrood power in 2007 came after Scottish Labour failed to use devolution to grow the economy. A talented SNP ministerial team, including economist Alex Neil and entrepreneur Jim Mather, offered a down payment on the economic advantages of full independence. But after that, things went wrong. Very wrong. Under Sturgeon, pandering to overseas investors led to much of our manufacturing base being sold to carpet-bagging foreign capital, and a red carpet was laid out for international banks. Local control of the economy has been sharply reduced, the opposite of what independence is for. One result was the infamous Growth Commission report that kicked the creating a Scottish currency, and with it control over interest rates, into the long grass, lest it upset the foreign banks. Above all, the SNP government became risk-averse on economic matters, preferring platitudes to taking on vested interests. John Swinney promised 100,000 jobs from the North Sea that did not materialise because he was too unwilling to challenge Treasury and EU rules on state intervention. SNP members voted for a national energy company, but Nicola took it out of the 2021 Holyrood Manifesto, just months before the soaring gas bills made it a necessity. True, there was the creation of the National Investment Bank, but this was immediately handed over to professional bankers, the very folk who caused the 2008 financial crisis. The NIB is window dressing. Instead, it should be pioneering a massive social house building programme and taking over the energy industry. The truth is that a successful economic policy requires an industrial policy, and that requires state intervention, fiscal incentives, and generally opposing vested interests everywhere. It demands local control for local needs, not pandering to foreign interests. It requires taking on the energy monopolies and giant English-based housing companies that deliberately hoard land. It means using the National Investment Bank to prioritise strategic projects in key industrial sectors, ones that include global competitive advantage for Scotland, including battery production and AI. It means making hard choices, not pretending a wee country can do everything while being scared to upset someone. It means redirecting cash from consumption to capital investment. It means thinking long term. Whoever wins the SNP leadership contest has to refocus the economy. Firstly, by prioritising the reindustrialisation of the Scottish economy away from the debt-filled, consumptionist model imposed by the city banks. Scrap Scottish enterprise and create a proper industry ministry. Abandon the propaganda exercises of creating independence commissions chaired by failed business people. Hire the best economic brains and tell them to get on with the job. Scale up the National Investment Bank to provide Scottish industry with the resources it requires. Take risks, knowing some will fail and some will succeed. Secondly, challenge UK Treasury rules on borrowing and investment. Pick a proper fight with Westminster, where every voter knows that it is in their interest that the Scottish Government wins. Fight Westminster on their economic ground. It's heads we win, tails they lose. Third, officially bin the Growth Commission report and tell folk what we need to do to solve the cost of living crisis as an independent nation. Independence is about controlling our economic destiny, or it is not independence. That means controlling our own banks, our own currency, our own interest rates, our own trade and our own taxes. But all that will be useless unless we have a government prepared to act. That is the true test for the next SNP leader. And that comment piece from The National was by George Caravan. From The National, Monday the 27th of February 2023, from the comment section, Kirsty Strickland, social media detectives in Nicola Bulley case should be ashamed. The body of missing mother Nicola Bulley was finally found last week, just over a mile away from where she was last seen at St Michael's on Wyre in Lancashire. The grim discovery marked the end of the high-profile search and the beginning of the mourning period for her devastated family and friends. The family's trauma over the last month can only have been compounded by the horrifying circus that surrounded the investigation. Nicola's disappearance was the subject of a social media frenzy, the likes of which we've rarely seen before. The perplexing nature of her disappearance and the length of time it took to find her body led to endless speculation. As the days went by, interest in the case only increased. Armchair detectives, who seemed to envisage themselves starring in a future Netflix true crime documentary, took to social media to share their theories in the case. They attempted to analyse the body language of Nicola's friends and family during interviews, and used that as a basis for the wild hypotheses they shared with their followers. The only qualification they had to make such pronouncements was the narcissistic delusion that they had spotted something that nobody else had. These girls also descended on the area to film content for social media and take selfies by the bench where the missing mum's phone was found. They attempted searches of empty buildings nearby, harassed local residents, and falsely accused and named various people as being responsible for Nicola's disappearance. One of the most unsettling aspects of this whole spectacle was the evident enjoyment of those who participated drew from it. For those who knew Nicola Bulley, her disappearance was an unfolding tragedy, but for the social media detectives, it was nothing more than a game. They inserted themselves into an active investigation and were clearly thrilled by the social media clout and sense of importance that came with it. They weren't trying to help a worried family or find a missing woman. They were chasing likes and clicks in a moment of gruesome fame. Last week it was reported that a 34-year-old barber, who had been one of those capitalising on Nicola's disappearance to create content on TikTok, lied to the police so that he could sneak into a field and film the moment that her body was recovered from the river. He earned £900 in royalties for that despicable video, and although it has since been removed by TikTok, it remains elsewhere. There's no doubt these selfish idiots made the job of hard-working local police officers even harder. But the way that the Lancashire Police senior officers behaved, particularly during the latter part of the investigation, also needs some reflection. As time went by and frustration and media attention mounted, the press conferences held by the Poors became increasingly belligerent. Senior officers clearly felt unfairly maligned over the failure to find Nicola. That attitude seeped out in their interactions with the press, which were at times bad-tempered and unprofessional. In an attempt to deflect criticism and stop the endless speculation as to why they had focused their search on the river, they revealed Nicola had specific vulnerabilities that made her a high-risk missing person. When that disclosure didn't have the intended effect, they went further and revealed intimate details about her personal life and health. This was, without question, a self-serving and shameful moment in the investigation. There was nothing to be gained in sharing such personal information. The sole purpose in revealing it was to defend the prior decisions that the force had taken during the investigation. Of course, media outlets didn't hold back in their criticism of the social media detectives and the incompetent communication of Lancashire Police, but they also contributed to the feeding frenzy around this tragic case. In a statement released after Nicola's body had been found, the family were rightly scathing about the actions of certain outlets. It said, We tried last night to take in what we had been told in the day, only to have Sky News and ITV making contact with us directly when we expressly asked for privacy. They again have taken it upon themselves to run stories about us, to sell papers and increase their own profiles. It is shameful they have acted in this way. Leave us alone now. A fundraiser to help with funeral costs and support Nicola's husband and daughters has so far raised more than £32,000 in donations from members of the public. Hopefully now the girls have packed up and gone home, the family will be given the time and space they need to cope with this devastating loss. And that was a comment piece by Kirsty Strickland. From the National, Monday the 27th of February 2023, from the comment section. The real face of SNP is quickly being exposed during leadership race. By Steph Payton, columnist. Whispers are springing around the air, and the promise of change is afoot for far more than just the seasons. Though the party doesn't seem to have realised it yet, the SNP's exceptional grip over Scottish politics is finally breaking. Regardless of personal opinions on Nicola Sturgeon, and God knows every flag-bedecked Twitter profile has one, it can't be denied that the SNP have benefited from the impression of progressive and forward-looking politics that came with her leadership, even if the organisation itself didn't live up to the manufactured image. For all of the talk of fair taxation, the difference between the Conservative and SNP models of taxation are relatively minimal in the face of it, while the regressive council tax, long promised to be scrapped by the SNP, remains as local government faces crippling budget cuts. And, while the adoption of socially liberal policies around LGBTQ+ equality are a staple of how the SNP now brand themselves, the fact is that it was a far greater struggle to drag the party into the 21st century than their breezy, self-congratulatory attitude would suggest. Still, the SNP managed to position themselves as a centre-left party, even while selling off green energy production on the cheap and backing subnational tax havens in the form of so-called free ports. In many ways, the party's reputation as a force for social good has acted as a counterpoint to their relatively milquetoast economic policies and penchant for ditching more radical ideas, often ones that they had campaigned on, when nobody was watching. Land reform? She doesn't even go here. This past week, having listened to the party's leadership hopefuls sitting out their respective stalls, I realised what it was that I had been struggling to put into words since Sturgeon's resignation. For the first time in years, the SNP have looked and sounded like a normal political party, and not the seemingly unassailable behemoth that led Scotland for the better part of 2 decades. Of course, the shine had been wearing thin for some time now. The bitter internal splits over the Gender Recognition Reform (GRR) bill revealed a party more divided in social issues than their outward-facing liberalism would have suggested. Much of the current antagonism towards transgender people in Scotland is a direct result of the SNP's failure to legislate on the issue in a timely manner. Now, we enter a new period for the SNP, one in which I suggest their image as a centre-left party of progress will not survive, although just how poorly they fare in time will depend on who the ultimate membership ultimately elect to lead them. However, one thing is certain: neither the government nor any of the current candidates have even the slightest clue on how to secure a second referendum or independence for Scotland, regardless of what they may tell you otherwise. Humza Yousaf wants to get the campaign for Indy restarted for what must be the 9th time in 9 years. Ash Regan thinks using an election as a de facto referendum will somehow get the UK government around the table, when they aren't even willing to explain why they overrode Scottish democracy with the recent Section 35 order. And Kate Forbes, well, who knows what she actually thinks? So far, all we've had is a waffle about working with anyone sporting a yes badge, regardless of how unpopular they may be with soft no voters, but no concrete plan on how to actually bring about independence. The current UK government is a seemingly impenetrable wall across the path to Scotland's self-determination, and a concerning number of voices in Scotland's largest party seem content, in their choice of candidate, to throw as many vulnerable people against the wall as it takes to bring it down. Personally, it seems to me counter to the entire enterprise of self-determination to back any candidate that has explicitly voiced intent to let the UK government's undemocratic interjection in blocking the GRR bill pass without a fight. Nicola Sturgeon, for better or worse, was pretty competent at knocking back concerns over both the SNP's route to independence and the party's firmly centrist political stance. In her successors, I see little chance of that continuing. The SNP's decline will not be overnight. First, it will manifest as many party members holding their noses and voting for the greater good of securing a future referendum. But it's much harder to imagine a future scenario in which the youth wing of the party will be putting in serious hours of campaigning to return a First Minister who, should Forbes take the election, holds anti-LGBT beliefs and opposes reproductive rights. And as the activist base dwindles, so too will the party. I doubt the SNP's 2014 intake of members, sold on the image of a progressive, independent Scotland, will hang about for someone whose politics are so reprehensible, nor for someone like Ash Regan, who opened her campaign with bizarre and uncalled for defence of the oil industry at a time when climate change is causing back-to-back crises around the world. It took a week to dismantle an image that the SNP took the SNP years to carefully craft. Even the good voices in the SNP won't be enough to stop the party's decline now. Not for a while, at least. And that column was by Steph Payton. From the National, Monday the 2nd of February 2023, from the comment section: What would Scotland look like if the Scots saw the Macron Report? By Richard Johnson, who worked in management, construction and production in the North Sea oil industry, both on and offshore, for more than 30 years. In 1974, the Organisation of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, cut oil production to increase the price of crude oil from $2.90 to $11.65. As a net importer, the annual UK balance of payment deficit increased by £2.5 billion. In a few years, this would force the UK into borrowing from the International Monetary Fund, IMF, to the tune of £4 billion. The books were out of balance as the UK could no longer exploit the colonial assets that it once had, especially in the Middle East. But a source of oil had been discovered in Scottish waters. The UK government then commissioned Gavin Macron Report to report on the potential wealth from oil reserves in Scottish waters and the consequences of it going to an independent Scotland, as opposed to becoming the saviour of the UK economy. Macron reported that this oil wealth would result in an independent Scotland gaining a chronic surplus in its currency, Scottish pound, making it the hardest currency in Europe aside with the Norwegian krone. Indeed, it could become the currency of security against inflation for foreign funds. This point is pertinent as Scotland's oil and gas reserves are similar or greater than Norway's. With a surge of support for the SNP now reaching 30% in the general election of October 1974, the UK government was horrified at the thought of the Scottish people becoming alerted to their nation's mineral wealth. It decided that Macron's work was to be buried in the deepest recesses of its archives, never to see the light of day again. I was involved in the construction of the massive oil platforms required in the race to exploit North Sea oil, in what ranked as our greatest ever civil engineering project. Tony Benn flew out and opened the valves, and the oil rushed ashore in immense quantities. No more expensive imports and excess black gold to sell for top dollar. And, to this day, all oil and gas revenues flow south to London. The true financial figures for how much Scotland contributed to London from oil and gas are difficult to ascertain, which is to the possible benefit of the latter. However, we have a direct comparison by looking to Norway for the truth. As the richest nation per capita in Europe, independent Norway controlled its mineral wealth and built up its economy wisely. The Norway Government Pension Fund, Oil Fund, now stands at around $1.3 trillion. This fund is strictly controlled and is estimated to continue to fund Norway's social costs for 300 years. As a direct comparison, the UK has squandered every cent from the North Sea oil reserves. With its now clearly visible lack of any energy policy, the UK acted like a sweetie shop, filling its pockets for free while emptying the shop. With its inability to create a sustainable post-colonial economy, the UK went from boom to bust. There was little investment for the future, little social care or infrastructure, and even less for Scotland. This boom and bust affected the Aberdeen economy especially, with negative equity in homes, the collapse of the traditional industries, which are not safe from Thatcher's destructive tendencies, and zero investment from the UK to future-proof of the city. The UK's windfall was instead spent like a drunk man by successive asset-stripping Westminster governments, intent on pointless imperial either wars. Britain was a superpower again, they thought, forgetting that oil was a diminishing resource unlike India, China, Persia, or any of their previous colonial adventures. The tragic waste and mismanagement is clearly seen in hindsight. We would have had the strongest economy in Europe, with Edinburgh or Glasgow being the choice of investors over London. We would have a sustainable economy distributing wealth and employment throughout the nation away from the UK model of London first. Our marine engineering and oilfield expertise would have made Aberdeen a true oil capital, similar to Dubai, not left discarded as a coal town by the UK. A new nation would have been built with the latest rail and road technology. We could have renovated our historic cities to become the tourism destination of choice, with full membership of the European Union. Additionally, we could have used the money to convert Scotland to a green economy, with hydro projects, marine engineering to develop undersea turbines, and wind turbines to exploit our natural energy resources. This should be an existential priority, not kicked down the road, the way the UK is treating the crisis. Investing massively in social housing with green energy for heating, renewing and repopulating the Highlands with timber production for industry and farming, building an army, navy and air force for defence, not attack, removing nuclear power stations from our territory, all of these are on the could-have list. Most importantly, no one would ever go cold or hungry on a meagre UK-sized pension. Macron was correct, as we see now from Norway's chosen path. Scotland never truly benefited from its mineral wealth. It's ironic that our hydrocarbon resources have contributed to a climate crisis, yet we've had no power to combat it. Instead, we merely propped up a failed state in terminal decline. And that was a comment piece by Richard Johnson.
This is from The National on Monday, the 27th of February 2023. This is from the news section. The headline reads, King's tea with EU chief enrages Northern Ireland unionists. This article is by Hamish Morrison. Northern Irish unionists have been infuriated after a constitutionally unwise meeting between the King and the leader of the EU as the Prime Minister finalises a new Brexit deal for the province. Leading Conservative Brexiteer Duke Smog said it was wrong to involve King Charles in the immediate political controversy on the day the Prime Minister will sign a new agreement with EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen. Baroness Arlene Foster, the former Democratic Unionist Party DUP leader and First Minister of Northern Ireland, said the meeting in Windsor Castle was crass and will go down very badly. Stories differ on how the controversial meeting came to be, with Buckingham Palace saying Charles was acting on the government's advice, while Downing Street insisted it was fundamentally a decision for the King. Charles and the European Commission President will sit down for tea late on Monday after she is expected to sign off on a long-awaited Northern Ireland Protocol agreement with Rishi Sunak. Rees-Mogg, a former cabinet minister, said, "It is surprising that the King will meet Ursula von der Leyen today, as it antagonises the people the Prime Minister needs to conciliate. It is also constitutionally unwise to involve the King in a matter of immediate political controversy." Baroness Foster added, "I cannot quite believe that Number 10 would ask His Majesty the King to become involved in the finalising of a deal as controversial as this one. It's crass and will go down very badly in Northern Ireland. We must remember, this is not the King's decision, but the government who it appears are tone deaf." The announcement of Monday's meeting came despite warnings that they could draw the King, who as head of state is expected to remain politically neutral, into the process of the UK and EU agreeing the deal, or be seen as tactically endorsing it. Downing Street defended the move to advise the King to meet von der Leyen, saying the Prime Minister fundamentally believes that final decision was for Charles. He firmly believes it's for the King to make those decisions, the Prime Minister's official spokesman said. He compared the von der Leyen meeting to Charles talking to Poland's Andrzej Duda or Ukraine's president. It's not uncommon for His Majesty to accept invitations to meet certain leaders. He has met President Duda and President Zelensky recently. He is meeting with the President of the EU today, the spokesman said. Asked why the final protocol talks were taking place in Windsor, he said, "There are a number of occasions when these sort of talks have been held in significant locations. This is no different." Conservatives were among those voicing their criticism of the meeting before it was even confirmed, following suggestions the deal would be called the Windsor Agreement. And Sammy Wilson, the DUP's chief whip, said the expected meeting would risk dragging the King into a hugely controversial political issue. Topics up for discussion between Charles and the EU chief include climate change and the Russian invasion of Ukraine, though it was unknown if they will discuss Northern Ireland. A Buckingham Palace spokesman said, "The King is pleased to meet any world leader if they are visiting Britain, and it is the government's advice that he should do so." Charles and von der Leyen will meet at Windsor Castle once her commitments elsewhere have been fulfilled. That article was by Hamish Morrison. This is from The National on Monday the 27th of February 2023. This is from the news section. The headline reads, Lidl, latest supermarket to place limit on buying fruit and veg. This article is by Adam Robertson. Lidl has become the latest supermarket to place a limit on the amount of fruit and vegetables which consumers are able to buy. Shoppers will only be allowed to purchase 3 tomatoes, peppers and cucumbers each, as it says there has been an increase in demand due to shortages at other shops. The move comes after Aldi, Asda, Morrisons and Tesco introduced similar restrictions. Issues with supply chains, climate change and skyrocketing energy prices hitting farmers have all been blamed for the shortages. The UK government Food Minister Mark Spencer has summoned supermarket chiefs to explain what they are doing to get shelves stocked again amid shortages of fresh fruit and vegetables. Specifically, he said the situation was being caused by recent poor weather in North Africa and that it showed how dependent we can be on certain trade routes for some types of foods. A Lidl spokesperson said, "As advised to our customers through signage in our stores last week, adverse weather conditions in Spain and Morocco have recently impacted the availability of certain salad items across the supermarket sector. Whilst we still have good availability across the majority of our stores, due to a recent increase in demand, we have taken the decision to temporarily limit the purchase of peppers, tomatoes and cucumbers to 3 items per person. This will help to ensure that all our customers have access to products they need." Tesco and Aldi are limiting customers to 3 units of tomatoes, peppers and cucumbers, while Asda is also limiting customers on lettuce, salad bags, broccoli, cauliflower and raspberries. Morrison's has set a limit of 2 items per customer for tomatoes, cucumbers, lettuce and peppers. That article was by Adam Robertson. This is from The National on Monday the 27th of February 2023. This is from the news section. The headline reads, Price Cap. Bills expected to rise amid calls for greater support. This article is by Adam Robertson. Ofgem is lowering its energy price cap. The amount suppliers are able to charge from the current £4,279 per year to £3,280 for the average household, effective from April 1st, it has announced. The regulator said the reduction of almost £1,000 reflects recent falls in wholesale energy prices. However, domestic energy bills are still set to rise by an average of £500 a year despite the reduction, as the government's support for households becomes more limited. The £3,280 figure indicates how much consumers on their energy supplier's basic tariff would pay if the government's Energy Price Guarantee (EPG) was not in place. But customers will pay about 20% more on their bills, approximately £500, as the government's EPG becomes less generous from the beginning of April, leading to an average bill of £3,000. When the upcoming end of the £400 energy rebate scheme, paid in 6 instalments of £66 and £67 a month, is factored in, the energy cost for households will increase even more. Ofgem Chief Executive Jonathan Brearley said, although wholesale prices have fallen, the price cap has not yet fallen below the planned level of the Energy Price Guarantee. This means that on current policy bills will rise again in April. I know that for many households this news will be deeply concerning. However, today's announcement reflects the fundamental shift in the cost of wholesale energy for the first time since the gas crisis began. And while it won't make an immediate difference to consumers, it's a sign that some of the immense pressure we've seen in the energy markets over the last 18 months may be starting to ease. If the reduction in wholesale prices we're currently seeing continues, the signs are positive that the price cap will fall again in the summer, potentially bringing bills significantly lower. However, prices are unlikely to fall back to the level we saw before the energy crisis. Even with the extensive package of government support which is currently in place, this is a very tough time for many households across Britain. Where people are struggling, we urge them to contact their suppliers to make sure they are getting all the help and support they are entitled to. We also think that, with bills continuing to be so high, there is a case for examining with urgency the feasibility of a social tariff for customers in the most vulnerable situations. Citizens Advice Chief Executive Dame Claire Moriarty said the increase will spell catastrophe for millions of households without further support from the government. She said, unless the government changes course on planned reductions to the level of support for households under the Energy Price Guarantee, we estimate the number of people unable to afford their bills will double from 1 in 10 to 1 in 5. The government must keep the EPG at its current level of £2,500. Recent drops in wholesale prices mean that they have the headroom to do this. The alternative is millions more people unable to keep their houses warm and keep the lights on. Commenting on the news, the SNP's energy spokesperson Alan Brown said people across Scotland would be scratching their head at the price cap coming down but energy bills going up. Jeremy Hunt must pass on the reduction in wholesale gas prices to consumers and bring down the government's cap on bills to £2,000 per year, he said. Brown continued, the UK government will actually be spending less on the Energy Price Guarantee because of the reduction in the Ofgem cap, so households should be seeing the impact of that on their energy bills. Instead, the Chancellor is planning on keeping the surplus while energy bills skyrocket again. In a country as energy rich as Scotland, people should not be paying through the nose for their gas and electricity bills. It is only because of decades of Westminster mismanagement of Scotland's resources that this has happened. The article was by Adam Robertson. This is from The National on Monday the 27th of February 2023. This is from the news section. The headline reads, SNP leadership candidates urged to make 5 key pledges. This article is by Laura Pollock. LGBT plus organisations in Scotland have called on the SNP leadership candidates to confirm their support for existing Scottish Government commitments to improve equality. The groups collectively wrote to Humza Yousaf, Kate Forbes and Ash Regan on Monday to ask that they commit to honouring current pledges. The letter was signed by Equality Network, Scottish Trans, Leap Sports Scotland, LGBT Youth Scotland, Stonewall Scotland and LGBT Health and Wellbeing. The letter asks candidates to confirm their support for 5 existing commitments. Tim Hopkins, director of the Equality Network, said, "We appreciate that there will be many issues for the next First Minister to deal with. As LGBT plus organisations, our concerns is that the existing commitments by the Scottish Government, which value and support Scotland's LGBT plus people, will be continued by the new First Minister. Will the candidates confirm that, or is there a risk that these commitments will be dropped?" The letter begins with the request to honour the Scottish Government's commitment to ban conversion practices through a bill introduced this year and to keep the Gender Recognition Reform Bill on the Parliament's books and commit to seeking the revocation of the Section 35 order, whether via the courts or by agreement with the next UK Government. Candidates were then asked to confirm support for improving the health of LGBT plus people through refreshing and improving the mental health strategy and work to prevent self-harm, and by continuing to fund transformation of NHS gender identity services for trans people, as well as to show leadership on improving attitudes towards LGBT plus people. Finally, the leadership candidates were asked to call on to continue work on implementing LGBT inclusive education. This practice is to ensure young people grow up knowing acceptance and support, as well as reducing LGBT plus young people's experiences of bullying due to their sexual orientation or gender identity. Dr. Rebecca Crowther, Policy Coordinator at the Equality Network, said, "Scotland deserves a leader who will continue pushing for equality and human rights in all aspects of life. We must see our humanity and human rights reflected in legislation. They must challenge Section 35 and deliver gender recognition reform. We must push for better accessible healthcare, tackle rising hate crimes, and we must finally end harmful conversion practices that have devastating long-term effects." Vic Valentine, manager of Scottish Trans, said, "While for now this might be a contest about who leads the SNP, ultimately, whoever is successful will go on to lead the country. LGBT plus people are a part of Scotland's communities, and trans people are your friends, family, colleagues and neighbours. It is absolutely vital that the future First Minister takes decisions on the interest of everyone, and rather than seeing protecting and improving trans people's lives and rights as an optional add-on, understands that doing so is a small but important part of leading a Scotland in which everyone can thrive." Debate over views on equal marriage and gender recognition reform have dominated the SNP leadership contest, with Yousaf speaking of his frustration at it over the weekend. Forbes facing criticism over her views after she said she would not have voted for equal marriage had she been an MSP in 2016 when the vote took place. Both Forbes and Regan have said they will not go ahead with Gender Recognition Reform Bill as it stands if they became SNP leader, but Yousaf has said he would go to court to challenge the UK Government's block on the legislation. The article was by Laura Pollock.
The National News on Wednesday, the 1st of March. BBC suspends licence fee for King Charles's coronation. An article written by Gregor Young. The BBC is to suspend the licence fee as part of a one-off dispensation for the King's coronation weekend. The move will allow venues to screen the live coronation ceremony coverage on May the 6th and the coronation concert on May the 7th without needing to purchase a TV licence. It costs £159 annually for a colour TV licence and £53.50 for a black and white TV licence. People who do not pay the fee can face a fine of up to £1,000 and, in rare circumstances, time in jail. Each year, thousands of people are prosecuted for failing to pay the licence fee. In 2020, there were 55,061 prosecutions and 52,477 convictions for TV licence evasion, according to parliamentary figures. The BBC said the dispensation was granted in exceptional circumstances, with the event needing to be of national importance and screened in a community setting. Examples of venues cited by TV licensing include community spaces such as churches and town halls, as well as commercial premises such as concert halls, performing arts venues and cinemas. The dispensation also applies to any outdoor venues which have the facilities to screen the coverage. The decision on whether an event is of national importance is taken on a case-by-case basis, taking into account if it's constitutional in nature, is in the public interest, is on a bank holiday, and if people are likely to want to watch in a community setting, such as a street party, where televisions may not normally be used, the broadcaster said on Tuesday. The licence fee was also scrapped for Queen Elizabeth's Platinum Jubilee celebrations in June 2022. King Charles III's coronation is the first to be staged in Britain for 70 years, and it will see the King anointed and crowned by the Archbishop of Canterbury in front of more than 2,000 guests. The Queen Consort will also be anointed and crowned in a simpler ceremony during the King's coronation service. An article written by Gregor Young. The National News on St David's Day, Wednesday, the 1st of March. Funding boost of £1.8 million for beloved Clyde tall ship. An article issued by the National News Desk. A Clyde-built tall ship has landed £1.8 million in funding that will keep it afloat and secure its future for years to come. The 126-year-old tall ship Glenlee celebrates 30 years back in Glasgow this year, and the grant will support essential inspections and repairs needed to help ensure the ship remains a landmark of cultural importance for the city for another 3 decades and beyond. The money is coming from the National Heritage Memorial Fund, set up to save heritage of outstanding importance to the UK that was at risk due to COVID's impact. Vital checks and repairs to the hull, decks and rigging of the ship are all part of the programme of significant works which will take place over a 2-year period, scheduled to be completed in early 2025. The tall ship, which is currently closed to the public, will remain shut until the end of March 2023 for the first phase of repairs, before reopening to the public for the busy summer months. It will close again in early 2024 for a 3-month period of more extensive works. This year will see initial work carried out within the cargo hold, around the foremast step at the front of the ship, the poop deck, which is the raised deck to the rear of the vessel, as well as the bowsprit, an extension which juts out from the bow of the ship and forms part of her iconic silhouette. Fiona Greer, Development Director at the tall ship Glenlee, said, "This £1.8 million funding is a lifeline for maintaining our beloved Clyde-built vessel, and we're overjoyed to have secured it from the National Heritage Memorial Fund through their COVID-19 response fund. The tall ship epitomises the last epoch of sailing ships in the world and has become such an iconic part of the Glasgow skyline and the city's cultural heritage." An article issued by the National News Desk. The National Politics on Wednesday, the 1st of March. Humza Yousaf backs changes to council tax rates for second homes. An article written by Xander Elliotts. Humza Yousaf has committed to backing a rise in council tax on second homes should he win the SNP leadership race. He said he would allow local authorities to change their rates in their area to collect extra income or discourage second home ownership. The Health Secretary announced the policy as part of a strategy which he said will particularly benefit Scotland's rural areas. He also unveiled plans for empty homes to be purchased or leased long-term to provide housing for key workers in rural areas. Mr Youssef said that £25 million of the Scottish Government's existing affordable housing allocation would be used to pilot the scheme. He said, "I know how important it is for key workers like our NHS staff, police and care workers to have homes near to where they work, and how hard that can be in rural areas where second homes drive up prices. Those working in hospitality, tourism or rural communities also face problems finding affordable housing in local communities, which can really harm local economies. As your first choice for Scotland's First Minister, I commit to taking the necessary action to support affordable and key worker housing by allowing councils to increase the council tax on second homes, either ensuring councils have extra resources to invest in housing or encouraging more second homes back into use by local residents. In many cases, it can be quicker and cheaper to buy up or long lease empty homes and bring them back into use than to build new ones. I believe part of this SNP government's investment in affordable housing should be used to bring empty properties back to life, so we can get more people into good quality affordable housing more quickly." Mr Youssef added that the scheme would also mean more work for smaller local builders and tradesmen to repair and restore these empty properties, ensuring all parts of our economy feel the benefit of turning empty properties back into houses for those who need them most. An article written by Xander Elliots. The National, on Wednesday, the 1st of March. Opinion: Energy companies are robbing people of Scotland's energy wealth. A column written by Ros Foyer. Nothing is more damning of Westminster's energy policy than the fact more than 1/3 of Scotland's households live in fuel poverty. But as we transition to renewable energy, we risk repeating the very same mistakes of the past, and this time with the support of Holyrood as well as of Westminster. This week, Ofgem announced the new energy bill's price cap for April 2023. With the UK government's energy price guarantee set to cover less of people's bills from April, the impact will be a rise of £500 for the average household's energy bill in the UK, despite the cap falling. At the same time as these numbers drive thousands into fuel poverty, for a small number of companies this is boom time. We've seen major energy companies post record-breaking profit after record-breaking profit. For some of these companies, the recent profit surge has led to a change of plans when it comes to the energy transition too, with BP announcing a scaling back of their plans to shift towards low-carbon energy globally. We're not seeing the immediate support for people necessary to tackle the cost of people's bills, or the longer-term thinking to ensure a safe climate for people across the world. Underpinning and even exacerbating the climate and cost of living crises is the relentless profiteering of global energy companies. Profiteering by companies like Shell, who just a few weeks ago announced profits of $40 billion. Companies like BP, which days later announced profits of £23 billion, and whose own chief officer said it has more cash than we know what to do with. Companies like Scottish Power and Scottish and Southern Energy, which have profit margins of more than 40%, simply from the fact they own Scotland's electricity grid, while they hike up energy bills for ordinary people. And what do these companies have in common, besides their profits? They have all won a lease to develop offshore wind on Scotland's seabed. And that typifies the problem, in the same way that we saw the privatisation of oil and gas in the 1980s and our electricity in the 1990s. We're now seeing the continuation of this failed approach with the outsourcing of Scotland's renewable resource. But it doesn't have to be this way. The extent of privatisation in the UK's energy system is unique within Europe. The publicly run companies of our neighbours are major players here in the UK. Sweden's Vattenfall, Denmark's Ørsted, and even Munich's Stadtwerke. When the UK government stepped in to provide support on energy bills last year through the energy price guarantee, it capped prices for households by paying the exorbitant prices to energy companies themselves. Compare this to the situation in France, where the government used its ownership of energy giant EDF to cap prices for people in France at 4%, by redirecting the company's profits. Rather than allowing energy giants to dictate phenomenal price increases, the French state used its ownership of one major supplier to limit the cost of energy entirely. The lack of control and the unwillingness to intervene in energy is holding us back from building an energy system that is designed to serve the workers and communities who rely on it. Soaring energy bills and multiple years of missed climate targets make this case clear. It's not working for anyone except those at the top. Governments can no longer afford to ask nicely of billion-dollar profit-making conglomerates. Yet a just transition is increasingly vital. As these firms post their record profits, working people in Scotland endure record energy prices. To deliver a fair shift in our energy will not only mean ensuring workers can transfer their skills and experience and that communities such as Aberdeen see new opportunities. It also means ending the existing injustices: fuel poverty, high energy bills, precarious work in the energy sector, and profiteering by energy companies. So far, we've replicated much of the approach to energy in the emerging renewable sectors. The industrial approach, privatising natural resources and encouraging any company to get involved, has the full support of the UK and Scottish governments. With the powers they have over energy, albeit limited, the Scottish Government is careering down the same well-trodden path. Workers throughout Scotland can't countenance the government blindly following the same course. We all know where this story ends. It ends in a race to the bottom, for our workers, for our communities, and ultimately for our planet. The 2017 commitment to a public energy company in Scotland should have been the first step towards a systematic shift of who owns and benefits from our energy sources, but it now sits abandoned. The ScotWind leasing project, while ambitious, has gifted up to 25 gigawatts of renewable energy potential to some of the world's largest energy companies. Whether it was the privatisation of BP and its oil resources, British Gas in the 1980s, or Scottish Power and Scottish and Southern Energy in the 1990s, this approach of allowing rampant profiteering within our energy sector has consistently failed people in Scotland. There's a huge appetite amongst workers and trade unions across Scotland to get the energy transition right, to make sure there are new quality jobs across the country, to secure economic opportunity in communities that have been ignored for decades, and to provide energy affordably, particularly for those who need it most. Despite the willingness to drive this transformation, the approach by the UK and Scottish governments continue to favour private companies and leaves aside people across the country. But workers won't sit back and watch on. We've seen workers at Bifab occupy renewables yards in defence of green jobs. We've seen youth climate strikers standing with trade unionists on picket lines. We've seen trade unionists marching shoulder to shoulder alongside climate justice activists during COP26. We've seen the workers at Rolls-Royce in Shinnon develop their own plans to decarbonise their workplace. And we've seen joint trade union, community and environmental campaigns across Scotland's key cities on public transport and retrofitting. Campaigns that connect the climate crisis to ordinary people's everyday material concerns. And never has that work been more important or more urgent than now. Because the challenge before us is to transform our energy system in a way that addresses the climate crisis, the cost of living crisis, and the green jobs crisis, all together at the same time. Workers have the answers and have shown time and again that they're ready to deliver. Pursuing the same course that has led us here will simply not cut it. A column written by Ros Foyer, who is the General Secretary of the Scottish Trades Union Congress. The National News on Wednesday, the 1st of March. Record high for school leavers in positive destinations. An article written by Lucy Garcia. The number of young people going into positive destinations after school hit a record high last year, figures show. A total of 95.6% of those finishing school in the last academic year progressed their studies or careers within 3 months of the end of the school year, up from 95.5% the year before, the latest attainment and initial leaver destination statistics from the Scottish Government show. A positive destination is higher or further education, training, employment or personal development. The proportion of young people who are unemployed fell to 3.9%, the lowest level since 2009 to 2010. There was also an increase in pupils leaving school in S4 and S5 last year. In 2020 to 2021, there were 12,995 leavers in S5 compared to 15,308 in 2021-2022, an increase of 2,313. S4 leaver numbers increased by 1,204 pupils, from 5,659 in 2020-2021 to 6,863 in 2021 to 2022. The gap between school leavers from the most and least deprived areas has narrowed, with a 4.4% difference between the number of pupils who go on to positive destinations from the most and least deprived backgrounds. In comparison, the number of pupils from the most deprived backgrounds going on to positive destinations was 7.7% lower than those doing so from the least deprived backgrounds in 2014-2015. The gap has reduced by 2/3 compared to 2009-2010. Education Secretary Shirley-Ann Somerville said, "This highlights the achievements of Scotland's learners. Making the transition from school can be a daunting time, so it's great to see a record number of young people progressing in their studies or careers after leaving school." These statistics also demonstrate the effectiveness of our approach to learning through the Curriculum for Excellence, which is clearly helping to prepare young people for their futures during a crucial stage of their lives. An article written by Lucy Garcia. The National News on Wednesday the 1st of March. ScotRail warns of travel disruption amid works around Carstairs. An article written by Andrew Smart. Rail travel across much of the Central Belt is to be disrupted amid major engineering works beginning this weekend, warns ScotRail. Throughout much of March, passengers will have to use alternative means of travel if they're wanting to go to or from Carstairs in South Lanarkshire. This will affect any and all travel going through Carstairs, forcing many to make new arrangements. The major engineering works are expected to last from Saturday, March the 4th, until May the 30th. This comes after months of disruption caused by a series of strikes by those employed by Network Rail and ScotRail. ScotRail has confirmed that buses will link affected destinations like Carstairs, Carluke and Wishaw for Edinburgh trains, providing an alternative for customers. Tickets for Carstairs will be valid via Lanark and on the local 37 and 137 Carstairs to Lanark buses. ScotRail has recommended that passengers check their train journey via the ScotRail website to see if they're affected by these ongoing engineering works. An article written by Andrew Smart. The National News on Wednesday the 1st of March. Slater hits back at calls to delay deposit return scheme launch. An article written by Lucy Garcia. No one with any credibility would delay Scotland's deposit return scheme, the Circular Economy Minister has said, after two SNP leadership candidates said it should be paused. Lorna Slater said it would be absolutely a kick in the teeth to industry to delay the controversial initiative which is due to start in August. The Scottish Greens MSP spoke after SNP leadership candidate and Finance Secretary Kate Forbes said the deposit return scheme will cause economic carnage for businesses and backed calls to pause it. The scheme, set to begin in August, involves shoppers paying an extra 20 pence when purchasing drinks in a can or a bottle, with the deposit returned when they bring back the empty container for recycling. Producers had until midnight last night to sign up for the scheme. SNP leadership candidate Ash Regan said that she would delay the deposit return scheme. Ms Slater said at the weekend that small drinks producers might be given a one-year exemption from the scheme, but stressed yesterday that its introduction should not be delayed. She told BBC Radio Scotland's Good Morning Scotland programme, No one with any credibility to support business in Scotland would delay the scheme further, because those businesses that have made that substantial investment, those shops that have got their planning permission for their reverse vending machines, they don't get their return on that investment until those 20 pences start flowing. The question on the table, and the sensible question, is what small producers can do to become compliant with the scheme. We've been working very closely with small producers, and we've got an extra £22 million of cash on the table. We're working through the issues. One of the requests on the table from small producers is that grace period, and that's exactly what we're working on. SNP leadership candidate Humza Yousaf has said he would keep smaller businesses exempt from the scheme for at least the first year of operation if he becomes First Minister. Asked what she thinks of the comment Ms Forbes made about economic carnage, Ms Slater said it would be absolutely a kick in the teeth to the industry to delay this scheme. Industry has put so much work into this. People have been recruited into posts. There is recruitment ongoing. We've got the sites for the sorting facilities, the trucks to collect all those materials. All of that is happening. That investment has been made, and those businesses who have done the right thing, they deserve that return on investment. Scottish Secretary Alister Jack has hinted the UK government might not agree to a UK Internal Market Act exemption for the scheme. The UK government said that following any decision, it would be up to the Scottish government whether they proceed with the scheme or not. Ms Slater said the Scottish government has been following the agreed process to seek the exemption. She added, "We're continuing to press the UK government for a decision as soon as possible, because, of course, businesses need that clarity from the UK government." An article written by Lucy Garcia. The National Politics. On Thursday, the 2nd of March. SNP calls for Alister Jack to be sacked amid claim he misled Parliament. An article written by Adam Robertson. The SNP has called for Alister Jack to be sacked after claiming that the Scottish Secretary blatantly misled Westminster. The row relates to efforts from the Scottish Government to implement the deposit return scheme. On February the 22nd, Mr Jack told the Commons, "We've not been asked for an exemption for this under the rules of the UK Internal Market Act 2020 by the Scottish Government. No request for an exemption has come. The exemption bar is very high indeed, otherwise what is the point of the Internal Market Act?" Under the Post-Brexit Act, goods that have been produced in or imported into one part of the UK and comply with relevant requirements there can then be sold in any other area without adhering to different regulatory standards. This means that the deposit return scheme will require an opt-out, as producers from the rest of the UK would be able to sell their products without having to add 20 pence to the cost. The SNP says that documents released by the Scottish Government disproves Mr Jack's claim, and that initial discussions about the need for an exclusion go as far back as 2021. The party added that John Swinney wrote to the UK Government to signal his alarm at the lack of progress on the issue. SNP MSP Fiona Hislop said that Rishi Sunak now had no option but to sack Mr Jack. Contrary to his claim in the House of Commons that no exemption has been sought for the deposit return scheme, documents released by the Scottish Government yesterday showed that initial discussions began in 2021, were stepped up in 2022, and in January the Deputy First Minister was forced to write to the UK Government expressing his alarm at the lack of progress. She said. Ms Hislop continued, "The deposit return scheme is a key environmental measure that will make a step change in helping to keep Scotland beautiful and meet our climate change targets. It's a policy that clearly falls within devolved competence and has been backed overwhelmingly by MSPs." As the supposed representative of Scotland in the UK Government, Alister Jack should be going out of his way to enable the smooth running of devolution, but instead he seems to be doing everything he can to sabotage it, and is now telling blatant untruths to cover his lack of action. The scheme is set to go live on August the 16th, although SNP leadership candidates Kate Forbes and Ash Regan have said that they would delay it should they replace Nicola Sturgeon. Humza Yousaf said he would exclude small businesses during the scheme's first year in operation. Ms Hislop added, When he took office, the Prime Minister pledged that he would lead a government with integrity, professionalism and accountability at every level. If he does not sack Alistair Jack, he will be failing on all three counts. In response to the claims, Mr Jack said no UK government ministers have received a formal request setting out the scope and rationale for an internal market exemption for the Scottish Government's deposit return scheme. Should such a request be received, it will be considered by the relevant Whitehall departments. As I've set out previously, the bar for an internal market exemption is very high. The Scottish Greens echoed the calls made by the SNP as they praised businesses, saying producers responsible for more than 95% of recyclable containers sold in Scotland are now registered with a deposit return scheme. They said there is a trail of evidence and questioned why Mr Jack barked into every available microphone that the Scottish Government had not applied for an exemption. The UK Government was approached for comment. An article written by Adam Robertson. The National News on Thursday the 2nd of March. Friends new to rowing in training for Atlantic endurance race. An article written by Lucy Garcia. Two friends from Scotland who have never rowed before are preparing to cross the Atlantic later this year in an endurance race. Sabrina Faith and Leanne Maiden met online in lockdown when looking for a new challenge and are now training to row 3,000 miles from La Gomera in the Canaries to Antigua in the Caribbean in December. There are no stops during the Atlantic Challenge race, and the duo will rotate between rowing, eating and sleeping for the duration of the journey, which is expected to take at least 60 days. The pair will row 2 hours on, 2 hours off, facing sleep deprivation, salt sores, physical extremes and the psychological challenges of the open ocean. They'll be raising money for 3 charities: the Polar Academy UK, the Women's Fund for Scotland and the Mabel Foundation. Ms Maiden, who's 41 and has 2 sons aged 6 and 7, said, "People keep asking if this is a midlife crisis. I'm not sure if that's the case, but whatever it is, it'll be a life-changing experience. Not many mums can say they've rowed the Atlantic Ocean. I want to teach my children that it's okay to do things differently and to challenge perceptions and reach for their dreams. I will miss my family. I've never been away from them for that long, but my husband will look after them and make sure they don't starve. My whole family has been incredibly supportive and excited about what will be a life-changing experience for all of us. We all can't wait for the moment I arrive and meet them in Antigua. It will be indescribable. We hope to inspire other women while raising money for women's and children's charities, which mean a lot to us. I would say to any other women who are looking for a challenge that you should just do it." The team, who've dubbed themselves She Roars, will be the only pair from Scotland rowing in this year's Atlantic Challenge. Stirling-based Pilates teacher Miss Faith, who's 43, moved to Scotland from Canada in 1999 and found out about the race while looking for a new challenge during lockdown in February 2021. Miss Faith said, "When I was back in Canada staying with my brother during lockdown, he told me he was training for an Ironman. There's a bit of sibling rivalry between us, so I wanted to outdo him. I found out about the Atlantic Challenge and I started looking online to find a team, which is how I met Leanne. This is an opportunity to feel strong, both physically and mentally, a chance to connect to something greater, and a chance to remember the basic connection to our planet and our universe." An article written by Lucy Garcia. The National News on Thursday the 2nd of March. Internet rumours blamed for sparking a riot in a Scottish town. An article written by Adam Robertson. Police have said that incorrect information circulated on the internet was behind a large-scale disturbance in a Scottish town. Hundreds of people surrounded a house in Dumbarton and attacked police vehicles when they were told to disperse on Tuesday evening. The occupants of the house were taken to safety and 2 men were treated in hospital after bricks and fireworks were thrown at officers. The house has now been boarded up and is not in use. An investigation is underway into the incident, which also left a number of police vehicles damaged. Police said they received reports of a large crowd gathering outside a house in Graham Road at around 10 to 7 in the evening. Up to 300 people had gathered at the location and refused to leave when requested by officers. No arrests were made, although a probe has been launched to identify those responsible. Officers believe the group gathered at the location due to inaccurate information on the internet. Area Commander Chief Inspector Ryan McMurdo said, "What happened in Graham Road last night is totally unacceptable, and I understand the fear and alarm it will have caused. I want to reassure the public a team of officers is working on the investigation to identify those involved, and I have every confidence they will find those responsible. Due to last night's incident, several police vehicles are out of service today, directly impacting local policing. As a police officer, I will always uphold the rights of those who wish to engage in peaceful protest. However, when that behaviour descends into criminality, resulting in the scenes we witnessed last night, then I will act and ensure those responsible will face the consequences of their actions." Detective Inspector Karen Cameron said, "We continue to carry out door-to-door inquiries and a search of the area will be conducted today. I would like to appeal to anyone with information or recorded footage of the incident to contact us." Officers will remain in the area to provide reassurance for local residents. An article written by Adam Robertson. The National, on Thursday, the 2nd of March. Opinion. Producers recognise their responsibility and back our deposit return scheme. A column written by Lorna Slater. Scotland's deposit return scheme is a major part of our efforts to reduce littering, cut emissions and address the climate emergency. On track to launch in August, our deposit return scheme will reduce littering by a third and CO2 emissions by 4 million tonnes over 25 years. That's equivalent to taking 83,000 cars off the road, and it's just the latest in a series of successful examples from around the world. Countries such as Germany and Denmark, and the regional schemes in Canadian states, have already shown what a huge and positive impact deposit return can have, dramatically reducing litter and cutting climate emissions. As the first of its kind in the UK, Scotland's deposit return scheme means big change, which is inevitably a challenge. However, I'm pleased to say that industry has risen to that challenge. As of yesterday, 664 drinks producers, representing more than 95% of the total volume of drinks containers sold in Scotland each year, have completed registration for the scheme. Circularity Scotland, the organisation responsible for administering Scotland's scheme, has been working closely with businesses of all sizes to prepare for launch in August this year. They're now at an advanced stage of building the necessary infrastructure and logistics network that will support the scheme. Sites have been secured across the country to handle and process material. Counting equipment and vehicle fleets are arriving. Recruitment is underway to create 500 new jobs in Scotland in processing and logistics. An estimated £300 million has now been invested by the private sector in the scheme. Even so, the deposit return scheme is a big change for small businesses to manage, and that is why Circularity Scotland has announced a £22 million package of support that will remove the day one and month one charges for all producers, up to a threshold of 3 million units per year. I know producers still have concerns, and that is why we're exploring all fair, feasible and legal options available to support them, including a potential grace period. The implications of a step like this, how it would work operationally, fairly and legally for businesses and communities, still need to be worked through. In the meantime, producers can continue to register even after yesterday's deadline, and I would encourage any who have not done so to do so as soon as possible. Advice and guidance are available from Circularity Scotland and SEPA, who have made it clear they will take a proportionate approach to compliance. They will work with businesses to help them get ready. Advice and guidance, not fines, will be the first step for any business that is clearly taking action but struggling to meet their obligations. Regarding the Internal Market Act, there is a process between the UK government and devolved governments to allow for exemptions, which has already been used successfully to exclude Scotland's ban on certain single-use plastic items. Following repeated requests for an exclusion dating back to July 2021, the First Minister has written to the Prime Minister this week, reiterating that the UK government must exclude the Deposit Return Scheme regulations from the Internal Market Act. Nonetheless, I can say that Scotland's Deposit Return Scheme will go live in August with confidence because people have voted with their feet. Producers have registered, and I'm grateful to them for doing so. They've done so because the overwhelming majority recognise their responsibility. They don't want broken bottles or plastic litter on our streets, in our parks and on our beaches either, and they recognise that this scheme is the way to end that blight. A column written by Lorna Slater, who is Minister for Circular Economy. The National Politics on Thursday, the 2nd of March. Stephen Flynn speaks out after being caught swearing during Prime Minister's questions. An article written by Lucy Garcia. Stephen Flynn has spoken out after being caught swearing during Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday. The SNP's Westminster leader was seen mouthing, "What the F with 3 stars was that?" after Sir Keir Starmer made a reference to the 1980s television show Auf Wiedersehen Pet during his question to the Prime Minister. Mr Starmer kicked off Prime Minister's questions by referencing data showing the average British family will be poorer than the average Polish family by 2030. If the Tories limp on in government, we're going to see a generation of young people learning to say Auf Wiedersehen Pet in Polish, aren't we? Said Mr Starmer. Mr Flynn could clearly be seen mouthing to his SNP frontbench colleagues as Mr Sunak went to respond. Asked about the incident on Times Radio, Mr Flynn smiled. "I think I maybe spoke for the public at that moment, if I'm honest, because I think all of us were thinking, what is Keir doing? He has multiple open goals and he's continually missing them. I'm not sure what point he was trying to make. It wasn't delivered very well. And sometimes we're like everyone else. We make wee mistakes. I made a wee mistake with what I said there, but I think I was speaking for the public," he said. Viewers had no trouble lip-reading Mr Flynn's contribution to Prime Minister's questions. "I think Stephen Flynn speaks for all of us here. Cringe beyond belief," wrote one Twitter user. An article written by Lucy Garcia.
That concludes this week's edition of the National Podcast. Please remember to subscribe to our channels at Q and Review and tell your friends about our service.